Go ahead.
A recent CBS YouGov poll found that 54% of Americans support the administration's deportation of illegal immigrants in the United States. Is the Democratic Party in any way out of touch with voters on this issue?
If you really start digging into the polling, it shows that it's when you start pointing out who it is, right? That if it's a mom that's been here, that's sought asylum, that's gone through the process, that it's children, then all of a sudden they don't support the deportation of those individuals. Donald Trump sold it as going after criminals, but they're going to Home Depots and car washes and restaurants. I don't know how many MS-13 members are working at car washes, Home Depots, and restaurants. So, and that's why you see the backlash of like the individual who was detained that was a restaurant worker in a red state, in a red city, and then all of a sudden her community came forward to help advocate for her. So I think that the Democrats understand that it's not about all immigrants. It's that how Donald Trump's trying to portray immigrants. Next question. Go ahead.
Senator Fetterman posted on X. He said, "My party loses the moral high ground when we refuse to condemn setting cars on fire, destroying buildings, and assaulting law enforcement." How would you react to that?
Well, go ahead.
I wanted to ask, I know you touched on this a little bit, some of you, but the president joking about arresting Governor Newsom.
I don't think that was a joke. It wasn't a joke.
So, I mean, speak to that, the concern that this is
I would say I'm against arresting any of the most prominent elected officials in this country. But if you're going to elect a prominent elected official, start with the one with 34 felony convictions.
Let's also be clear. Then the borders are said that he wasn't going to do it. Because obviously, if they did arrest Gavin Newsom, then it would change the narrative. And then it would be about the illegal arrest of a sitting governor who was elected by the majority of voters in the state of California, and not about a felon who is in the White House who is manufacturing chaos to distract from the fact that he is cutting hundreds of billions of dollars in needed programs that will kill people. This is about if it bleeds, it leads. So he has created and manufactured violence so that he can have a show on the television. But other people, older people, folks who are disabled, young people are going to be bleeding when Medicaid gets cut, when people are evicted from their homes. And this has been an illegal deployment of the Marines and the National Guards without the request or the consent of the sitting mayor and the sitting governor of the state of California.
So are you suggesting this is
So what we're talking about here is bad faith enforcement of our immigration laws. As the Speaker Emerita alluded to, people have to check in. People are following the law when their cases have not been fully adjudicated, and ICE is doing something unprecedented. They are arresting and deporting people who are following the law. That has understandably created people who have been put in an impossible situation. Americans do want our immigration laws enforced, but they're also fair. They don't like unfairness. They don't like people being denied due process rights. And that's what's actually going on also here when people show up to their hearings and then thinking they're obeying the law and then seeing their families being arrested and taken away, or showing up to schools and parents separated from their kids. This is going to inflame communities. These are intentional acts of inflammation by this administration. They need to pull back. They need to pull back the National Guard, and they need to rein in ICE's inflammatory tactics.
Are you suggesting, though, this is a distraction from the big, beautiful bill and the unpopularity?
Yes. Go ahead. All right, right here.
Now, you mentioned that you want to have the National Guard withdrawn. You want to have the National Guard even involved in this. You also mentioned the insurrection, so to speak, on January 6th. That was back when the National Guard was pulled back and was waiting for a long period of time, and then there was a big investigation that was put into that, and people said, "Where's the National Guard? We're having all these rioters who came into the Capitol. Where is the National Guard?" Then all of a sudden, here we have the National Guard that was put in there because there was, let's face it, a lot of rioters and a lot of violence that was going on there that you're calling peaceful protesters. But a lot of people didn't see that on the TV screens. So either you don't have the National Guard that didn't come in on time on January 6th, or you do have the National Guard where there was violence. We did see it on our TV screens. What do you want?
So, wait a second. So on January 6th, I was here. There was 50,000 people outside. They were scaling the walls. They were bashing in, breaking in, with members of Congress trapped in the gallery, including myself, including a lot of the people here. That was a dire situation where the police were run over. People were beaten with.
Over in Los Angeles.
And the difference is Speaker Pelosi asked for help. Very different situation. And here's the thing. Donald Trump is the one that was actually inciting that. And here's what's also going on. How many police officers have died in L.A.? 0. How many people died on January 6th? 5. How many people their heads were beaten in here? At least 1 or 2 or maybe more. Right? There was so when people say that it's Democrats are being not consistent is completely wrong. Next question.
Sir, why address this as a distraction from the big beautiful bill and Musk instead of treating it as a goal unto itself?
Who are you with again?
I'm Reuters, sir.
Anybody? Instead of
I think there's some difference of opinion here as to what Trump is trying to distract us from. But it's clear that that's what he's doing, and he can create so much inflammation in Los Angeles and then say, oh, well, now there's a riot that I've created. I think what he's trying to distract us from is the most embarrassing big bromance blowout in history, but more importantly, the biggest amount of corruption since the privatization of the Soviet Union. The $400 million plane, the $300 million from Chinese interests into Trump coin, and the $2 billion from Abu Dhabi into his Trump stablecoin. We shouldn't be having this press conference here. We should be having charts showing you the levels of corruption that we've seen in the Trump administration. But Trump thinks he can win by tearing down the city of Los Angeles.
I got a lot of calls about the arrest of David Werta, who's one of our organized labor leaders at SEIU. And so this started on Saturday. It was mentioned here several times that they were in South L.A. They were in my district. They were in our district. They were in Paramount. They were in Lenox. And they were in Compton, California. And they were roughing up. They were basically raiding. They were doing anything that they could to get the numbers that the president wants to prove what he said he was going to do when he was campaigning. He was going to get millions deported. And so you all know, how many know that Los Angeles is a sanctuary city? First, do you know that? How many of you know and understand that those people who are on the ground, who are seeing what is going on, should be paid attention to? I don't like the idea that the minute the president says there's violence, the press kind of responds to that. I was on the ground. I went on the ground on Sunday. I went to downtown detention center to try and get in. They slammed the door in my face. There were few people outside. They were not protesting. But guess who really had the attention? It was the National Guard, armed with huge, look like AK-47, huge weapons pointed at the people on the sidewalk who were barely protesting at all. And so the first thing you got to get it in your heads is you cannot believe what the president is telling you. You've got to understand that he's a liar, that he cannot be trusted, that he wants to get the numbers. He wants to show MAGA crowd that he's in fact getting the numbers he promised he was going to get to deport people out of the country. Now, if you're not careful in the way that you analyze this and you see this, you're going to not understand when martial law is called, you know what is about to happen? I'll tell you what is about to happen. The National Guard is the first call out. The Marines, the second call out. Doesn't that cause you to wonder, why are we getting all of these armed forces out when the protests and even those who were out of step with what we are advocating, peaceful protest, did not create any violence? Nobody was shot. Nobody was killed. Get it in your heads. And so when martial law is called, what are you going to say? I missed the point. Don't miss the point, you all. Don't think that somehow, because they called out the National Guard, there was violence. There was no violence. I was on the street. I know. And I went from downtown detention back out into the community, talking to people what happened in Paramount, what happened in Compton, what happened in Inglewood. So, first of all, get it straight. And don't just rely on what you're being told or the few incidents that you saw. He's provoking. He's trying to make sure that he gets people angry. People are worried about separation of families, children from their mothers and their fathers, etc. And of course, we always have to be careful that they're not agent provocateurs that we've learned about historically, that's in the middle of all of this, trying to make sure that they create violence. We are not creating violence. We don't have any outpouring of violence. We are saying we want peaceful protest. The Constitution guarantees that. Stop this lying president from what he's doing and getting into your heads, and get it straight.
The arresting of a member of Congress, threatening to arrest an individual is all part of a pattern of a president that is outside the bounds of the law. You know, when it comes to the elected officials, when it comes to attacking the courts, trying to impeach judges, ignoring court orders, sending in the military, nationalizing or federalizing the National Guard. That is the dark path that we are talking about. That is the path we are on, where he will end up in a place where he ends up calling martial law, unless the American people see that what's going on in California is an excuse to test the bounds of his authority or break those bounds completely.
The president has said he can't send in the Guard without the governor's agreement, permission. The president has said, I don't know if I have to obey the Constitution. I hope the president would read Article 10 of the Constitution, and I urge all of you to do that as well, because Section 12046 of Article 10 says that the National Guard cannot be called up by the president without the consent of the governor. So that is the basis under which he's proceeding. That is the basis on which the governor of California is suing. Really, I think it's really important for people to know how this came to be. Raids that they were holding, situations where if your case is not settled, you know, if you're still out there and haven't had a resolution of your status, you have to, by law, report in on a regular basis. You are obeying the law, and now they are deporting people for obeying the law. So, as others have said, it's a distraction. It's really stupid, because we understand that we are a nation of immigrants. We want people to have a facilitation of their status. We do not want any violent protest, and that would be addressed for those who are acting violently. I do want to say two more things. One is, and I say this as a former party chair, when there is a large gathering of people, the anarchists see it as an opportunity and they move in. So always have to be careful whether you see a burned car or broken window or whatever it is. It may be the exuberance of the moment, but it may be the anarchist setting in. I heard one of the former police chiefs of Los Angeles speak about this on Sunday. Secondly, and you know this to be true, and I haven't seen it really reflected so much in the press, in a bipartisan way, on January 6th, with violence against the Constitution, against the Congress, and against the United States Capitol, we begged the President of the United States to send in the National Guard. He would not do it. Not only would he not do it, when law enforcement people were being harmed, some later died, he would not send it in when an instigation that an insurrection that he incited was causing damage to those assigned to protect the Capitol and the Constitution that day, to accept the results of the Electoral College. That day, he didn't do it. He forgave those people. Now his people want to raise money for them, and yet, in a contra-constitutional way, he has sent the National Guard into California. Something is very wrong with this picture. Inconsistent in his actions, contrary to his own statement that he couldn't, of a year ago, that he couldn't send anyone in without the governor's consent, any place, and in violation of the Constitution.